Okay, so globally, women make up just 11% of the information security workforce, and this percentage has not changed since 2011. The stagnation of women's participation in the workforce is particularly troubling, as the gap between available and unfilled positions in cybersecurity is estimated to grow to 1.8 million by 2022. Attracting and retaining more women has the potential to shrink this gap, but only if they can be hired, trained, and retained in sufficient quantities or numbers. Not only is diversity key in addressing the skills gap, but in a security landscape where attackers continue to outpace defenders, enriching problem solving with a diversity of perspectives could be pivotal in keeping up. My name is Rhea Naidoo, and I'll be hosting the panel today. I'm an engagement manager at McKinsey & Company, part of the Cyber Solutions by McKinsey team. I'm a mechanical engineer who spent 4 years designing and building mega project processing plants in South Africa. We're talking about $1 billion smelting processing plants for Glencore. After that, I decided to follow my passion for technology and join the firm's business technology office in Johannesburg. And after a short time, I managed to convince McKinsey to send me to San Francisco, where I fell in love with cybersecurity. For the past 7 years, I've also been the author of my blog, engineerchic.com, which advocates and celebrates women in highly gender-exclusive technical fields. I'm thrilled to host this panel of successful and distinctive women as we have a research-backed discussion about the real challenges that women face in the industry, the structural issues and unconscious biases that are negatively impacting career advancement and retention of women, and the practical steps that companies can take and should take to create a more balanced workplace. But before I start, I'll hand it over to the panel to briefly introduce themselves. Why don't you go ahead, Mandy?
I'm Mandy. I work for the Australian government, but I'm here on my own, so anything I say cannot be attributed back to the Australian government. I have a background as a fraud investigator and a computer forensic analyst, and I'm currently working in a cybersecurity role. I am the branch executive of ASA Brisbane, and I'm the chief editor of the Australian Women's Security Network blog. I'm also an illustrator and a muso.
Hi, so, okay, I'll keep it further away. Hi, so I'm Kate Pearce from Cisco, senior security consultant there, so I do the normal things, whether that's breaking or advising, what it takes to make customers make good security decisions. I do a lot of speaking, mentoring of other women, and believe a lot in sort of the power of diversity and difference. And if you were there, you would never forget, at UnrestCon last year when I keynoted, I had the entire crowd, sober I must mention, singing about hacking to the tune of Amazing Grace. Yes, it really happened. Ask around.
Hey everybody. Oh, I guess it's not on. Hey everyone, my name is Shannon Morse. I am one of the hosts of Hack 5, which is the longest running information security podcast online, and it also has the largest following. I am in charge of everything involving that podcast, from researching and writing my own segments to hosting, producing, distributing, editing, camera work, and well, I already said distribution, but pretty much everything involved with the podcast. Most recently, I have been in Jason Bourne as one of their extras, which was through Hack 5, which was really cool. And then most recently, if you guys have NVIDIA chipset drivers at home, you can see me on your most recent downloads. So you will see a picture of me, and it's because I'm an NVIDIA influencer, apparently. I didn't choose that, but apparently it happened. I'm the only person out of our crew that has a ham radio license, and I'm completely self-taught for the past 10 years. So I just kind of fell into it and fell in love with the genre. So I love it.
Wow, that's a tough act to follow. I'm Kylie Hunt, and I am I've reinvented myself as a workplace happiness guru. I did this because after 20 years in the corporate property industry, I got sick of banging my head against the glass ceiling. Corporate property is a very male-dominated industry, and it really rang true for me when I was made redundant when I was 6 months pregnant. So I have certain aspirations here today about getting some of the discussions out on the table, some of the issues on the table. And at the end of the day, I'd just like to say that we want the best person for the job, regardless of whether they're a male or a female, but it needs to come from an equal playing field. And the discussion that we're going to have today will show that it isn't an equal playing field. And we're really privileged to have you guys here to try and help that playing field become a little bit more level. And just on a side note, I didn't know about the Jason Bourne claim to fame. I have a claim to fame. My claim to fame is that I was an extra in The Matrix, which was a very long time ago. So
Wow.
there you go.
Wow, that's
Does
a win.
it?
That's a winner. Okay.
Thank you.
I feel really separate from everyone else here, so I'm just going to run down there. So we have about 25 to 30 minutes of questions, and then we can take 5 minutes of questions from the audience at the end. So the Global Information Security Workforce Study is conducted every 2 years by the Center of Cyber Safety and Education. The latest study conducted in September 2016 surveyed just under 20,000 male and female information security professionals from 170 countries worldwide. The study found that women are entering the field with higher education levels than men. 51% of women versus 45% of men enter with a master's degree. Secondly, there is 1 woman for every 6 men in non-managerial roles, but this drops to 1 in every 10 men at managerial levels. So women are coming into the field more educated, but quickly falling behind their male counterparts. Kate, what could be some of the reasons for this?
So, in short, if women are not over-credentialed, they're not credible. They're not perceived as credible. So we have to be perceived as better, or we're perceived to not be good enough. And that's not exactly a small thing. Additionally, there's a lot of non-traditional paths that men have to get in that either aren't available to women or, frankly, aren't safe. The common one which I'll raise, and this is always good at a conference, is anything which focuses on pizza and alcohol. That tends to bias towards a certain type of attendee. And
I like pizza.
no, I like pizza too, but it's about the culture that it brings. And it would be nice if women could get access to opportunities without having to get very, very drunk with people they've only just met multiple times a week. Men can do that. Women can't, and that cuts out a lot of other things. And as a result, we often feel the need to go and get credentials or education. And it doesn't always work, because if you look, and we said this will be data driven, so I'm going to pull up a study, and you can flick to that there, and I'll explain what it is when we get to it. So when people are assessing candidates for positions, men and women, we like to think that they'll get the best person for the job and that they're assessing objectively. This is from a study which you can't really read. The article title is Constructing Criteria, Redefining Merit to Justify Discrimination. It's by a couple of Yale University researchers. They used a couple of examples, and the one we have here was looking for a candidate for a replacement police chief. And what happened is, if a male applicant was overly educated, but not particularly experienced on the street, people said that was good. But if it happened to a woman, they flipped it. If a woman was educated on the street and the man was educated, either way, what would happen, and I'll pick some of their quotes. They did not view male and female applicants as having different strengths and weaknesses. Instead, they redefined criteria for success at the job as requiring the specific credentials that a candidate of the desired gender happened to have. So basically what that means, and this is something I've said many times, is meritocracy is whatever you tell yourself to justify you being in the position you're in. And that's a really hard thing. But what we do all too often is we find someone we like or a choice we want to make and then justify it. And the playing field is not level because men and women are not assessed on the same things. And I'm conscious of time. So I really would encourage you to go and look at the study because it does actually show gender bias in the other direction for a women's studies professor. But the fact is, in a field which is largely one gender or the other, it becomes a self-reinforcing echo chamber. And whether you want to admit it or not, we're plainly an echo chamber because where are all the women? But at the same time, we keep talking about getting more women in, at the same time that we complain that it's a horrible place to be a woman. Why would you want people to come and join a field that you keep saying is horrible for them? We need to fix that as well.
Thank you. That's a really great point. Mandy, why do we see fewer women promoted to managerial positions?
Well, firstly, I think a positive note, this really is changing because in the ASX, which is the Australian Stock Exchange, the boards for the companies in the ASX in 2009 were 8.3% women represented on their boards. And in 2016, that's now 25%. So yes, we are still seeing fewer women in managerial positions, but there is a change happening very, very slowly. Now, there are many, many reasons why women aren't getting promoted or aren't in managerial positions or in leadership positions, and we have such a short time. So the one thing that I am concentrating on here is something the women themselves can do to change, to make things better. Because it's all very well going, the workplace needs to do this, the boss needs to do this, men need to do this. And if anyone knows me, I don't do the gender agenda. I think we are an inclusive society. If we have the skills, whether you're male, female, black, white, purple, my friend and I here, for example, then if you are the best person for the job. So I don't do a gender agenda. But I believe that women are often their own worst enemies. Now, because Rhea encouraged us to have a look at some articles, and I actually found a study from 2013, Thomson Reuters and Barbara Anderson Associates did, where they found that the women surveyed believed that all they needed was to be skilled, have an education, and they will be promoted. Now, they may have happened in my parents' time. Now, my parents are in their 90s, and they firmly believe if you're really a good worker, then you'll get promoted. But that is not the way of things in the 21st century. Another article, there was a research article from the Chartered Management Institute in 2016 that found men were more likely to be promoted by 40%. They were more likely to be promoted than women. And so both these studies were then looked at by several universities, and they found that there was one theme persistent throughout. And I could relate to it because it's something that I do. Women cannot advocate for themselves. They cannot promote themselves. So they may have been the best person for the job, but they, for some reason, it's probably a cultural thing in the way they were brought up, they cannot self-promote. So I think women need to learn to articulate what they can do.
Can I jump in there? I want to jump in there quickly because at the same time, there are studies that show when women do self-promote, they're punished for it.
This is true. So part of the learning experience then is how do you self-promote and not be thought of as abrasive or that you're trying to be a man. So the challenge is for women, and I really think we need to own that as something that we can change as influencers. And we're here, sitting here talking about this very topic, and people have come to listen to this, and I'm sure they all have ideas too, on how women can advocate for themselves, coming across in a way that is best suitable for them in a diverse society.
I agree, and thanks for bringing up the studies. I think that the McKinsey Women in the Workplace study actually says that women are, in fact, negotiating just as much as men, but are not achieving as many promotions. So what are we doing wrong, and what about the workplace is preventing women from succeeding when they're having those discussions? So I just want to quote Sheryl Sandberg in her book, Lean In, Women, Work, and the Will to Lead. Aggressive and hard-charging women violate unwritten rules about acceptable social conduct. Men are continually applauded for being ambitious and powerful and successful, but women who display the same traits often pay a social penalty. Female accomplishments come at a cost. So I think this segues really well into my next question. And it's a little bit of, oh, there we go. So the same study I mentioned earlier asked men and women about diversity and inclusion. 51% of women say that they have experienced discrimination in the workplace, while only 15% of men reported experiencing discrimination. Here is the breakdown. So 87% of these women reported that they have experienced unconscious biases. 53% said that they had experienced unexplained denial or delay in their career advancement. And 29% said that they have experienced exaggerating highlighting of mistakes, errors, and occurrences. So, Kylie, tell me a little bit about unconscious bias. Some in the audience may not be familiar with this term, so can you give some examples?
Certainly. So I might enlist the help of Malcolm Gladwell to help discern the difference between conscious and unconscious bias. In Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink, which is a fabulous read, he says that our attitudes towards race and gender essentially operate on two levels. Our conscious level, so this is what we choose to believe. So we might say, actually, I choose to believe that women should have equal opportunities in the workforce. The next level is the unconscious level. Now, this is something that we don't deliberately choose. This is influenced by the people we've met, the experiences we have, the books we read, the education we have. And what's disturbing about this is that these unconscious attitudes might be completely incompatible with our conscious bias, with our conscious levels. So our unconscious levels might be very different to our conscious levels. What we would like to do here is to actually raise those examples and say, well, actually, it was only when I was asked the question, hey, do you have some examples of some unconscious bias, where I've gone, oh, actually, I didn't think I did, but I do. And, you know, a key example would be when I was sitting in a boardroom full of men, and I was trying to get a point across. Now, I would say it diplomatically, I would say it objectively, but yet I wasn't heard. And then the person next to me or another gentleman in the room might say exactly the same point, but say it in a more aggressive or powerful way. And everyone would go, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. And I'm like, oh, I just said that. Were you not listening? And so there's things like that that we experience all the time that might not be something that we would generally think of as being an unconscious bias, but it clearly is. And that's just one example of many. And I won't go into the to all the details, but just one other quick thing on that. I know you're chomping at the bit. Is there's this feeling that when we talk about men, we talk a lot about leadership and strength and men being providers, and traditionally women are seen as the nurturers and the caregivers. And it goes to that point before where we do show strength and leadership, it's often sort of seen as bitchy, or you're not the right person for the job. So I think as someone raised earlier, we're having to fight so much harder for the same thing. And it's driving us up the wall because, you know, we're here trying to balance having a career, being a wife, being a friend, being a mother, and yet we're still doing all the same stuff at home. And just one other thing, and then I'll be quiet, is for the gentleman in the room, I have a key message, and my husband is here as well. There are studies out there by UCLA, was one example, and they did a study that showed when women look at a messy house, their cortisol levels increase, their stress levels increase. When men looked at a messy house, their cortisone levels stayed exactly the same. So, gentlemen, if you would love a peaceful relationship at home, clean up.
Just to jump in there. So I think Sheryl Sandberg again and Lean In mentioned that as we see more and more women taking more responsibility in the workplace as and in some cases breadwinners for their families, we do not see an equal increase in men helping out in the home. So women are expected in today's society to do a lot more, and it is very difficult.
Yeah, and I'm just going to jump in there quickly because we often also presume that there is a man at home, not that it's another woman, not that they're a single mother. And that matters. I've had to talk to single women. I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know how to get you access to the opportunities that everyone else's partner open up for them. But to go to this unconscious bias, I have a particularly illustrative example that the panel hasn't heard yet. I told you yesterday. Okay, maybe Shannon's heard it. So I do consulting, and at the same customer, 6 months apart, talking about the same types of problems. Once I was told, you know, you need to make your opinion known and be forceful and make sure that, you know, you're credible and you let people know what you think. 6 months later, I was told that I needed to just be quiet, stop getting in the way and let people do their job. What changed? My gender. I'm trans. In that 6 months, I went from being perceived as male to being perceived as female. As a result, I went from being perceived credible and, you know, I should be more bullish and more pushy to just, can you just shut up and let me do my job? I was doing the same thing, the same way, the same person, same skills with the same people. I didn't suddenly go away and become aggressive. Their perception of me changed. And that changed their treatment of me, their expectations, and their behavior. This is real. This is not women whining. I've been on your side. This is real.
Wow, that is a very, very powerful example. Thank you for sharing. Shannon, you've been in the public eye for over a decade. What has been your experience with gender-based discrimination in the community?
I've actually, in some matter of way, I've experienced all 5 of those in one form or another. Unconscious bias or unconscious discrimination, as a female, you don't really notice it until somebody tells you that it's happening or until somebody describes it to you, which is why it's so important that we understand what that description is of unconscious bias. So with unconscious bias, I noticed that I experienced that a lot more through people that I know as compared to people that I don't know who just put out their overt discrimination. I have an email example, if you don't mind me reading it. This is from a guy named John who wanted to hire me to host an educational training video for this .com website. This is horrible. It's horrible. I'm just going to put it out there. Warning, trigger warning. This is happening. So this guy emailed me after I was like, yeah, I'm interested. Tell me about what you want me to do educational training videos on. I love teaching people things. He replied, sure, it's a new vibrator. We need a spokesperson. Lol. Sorry for the bad humor. I couldn't help it. It's inappropriate juvenile humor genes. What? Why? Like, he had this awesome professional opportunity where I could hire him as a client and I could do videos for him, where he was getting somebody in who has technical training of over a decade. And he told me he wanted me to do a video about his new vibrator. He didn't have to go there. He really did not have to go there. But after that, I ended up tweeting it out and publicly shaming him because, you know, it's what you do.
So if you ever need any examples of what gender discrimination looks like, just look at Shannon's Twitter feed. She loves calling them out, and I think that she's carrying a lot of water for women in this community. So thank you, Shannon. Okay, so moving on. So 48% of women. So hang on, let's go to the next one. So it turns out that 48% of men hold computer sciences undergrad versus 42% of women. And 22% of men in InfoSec hold engineering degrees compared with 14% of women. So men have more technical undergrads while women have greater diversity of skills. So Kate, what is the advantage in having a diversity of skills? How can these skill sets be leveraged at various levels of the organization?
So this is interesting, particularly for me, working in consulting where we have a lot of highly technical people. Oh God, I can never put them in front of a customer. The women tend not to have that tendency as much, which means when it comes to things that actually involve working with people, they've been socialized all of their life to be good at it. They've been expected to be good at it. And they've generally been trained better at, I'm not going to call them soft skills because they're a lot more difficult than the hard skills. because it requires you building a theory of mind, understanding motivations. You're not just reverse engineering a system, you're reverse engineering a person and the society that built them and they operate in. Now, women do that every day. As we go around in the world, we're modeling the people around us, whether that's for our own safety, as we have to do quite often, or for other reasons. And so we tend to be better at interrelating with people. We have those protocols down. And let me see, what did I say? What matters is the ability to interrelate and innovate in ways that can't be easily systematized. And yeah, women have been and still are expected to do those things, to teach, to communicate, to reconcile. Now, the particularly interesting thing is the excuses that keep us away from the technical are the very things that will be empowering women as we move forward to a future of automation, where the technical skills will be automated. People can give jobs to machines, but people in positions of influence won't be given control to machines anytime soon. And those who can translate the technical to the personal will be those that own the future. And right now, that's looking like it's going to be women, whether that's education or whether that's actually working in the workforce.
Yeah, I think that I'd just like to quote the McKinsey & Company Diversity Matters study. McKinsey & Company is just known for its embracing of diversity in general, and we're a company that is built on the fact that we are distinctive problem solvers. So I think that a lot of the studies that we do are to try to illustrate the fact that diversity impacts problem solving, and women are incredibly good problem solvers. But anyway, the McKinsey & Company Diversity Matters study showed that a statistically significant positive relationship between financial performance and more diverse leadership. The results of the study indicated that a more diverse company is better able to win top talent, improve their customer orientation, employee satisfaction, and decision making, leading to a virtuous cycle of increasing returns. And I think that another point that you made earlier when we were talking, Kate, is that a big challenge in our field is lobbying for funds. That's a huge challenge that a lot of us are facing. How do we convince our executives to finance our cybersecurity programs? And this is where communication, relationship building, trust-based relationships come in. And statistically, there's research that backs that women are more perceived as more trustworthy than men, and are really and have communication skills that a lot in our technical field lack. So, okay, but I know we're running short on time, so let's quickly move on. So going back to the fact that 48% of men hold computer sciences degrees versus 42% of women, it turns out that amongst millennials, this is shifting. In fact, 52% of women under 29 hold a computer sciences undergrad. So, Mandy, with more millennial women now earning technical degrees in fields that have been led by men for decades, how do we see the workplace responding?
Okay, well, on top of your stats, just for ordinary tertiary qualifications, women between the ages of 25 to 29, 39.6% of them have any type of tertiary qualification in Australia, when only 30.4% of men do. So women are obviously reaching out tertiary education, getting more academic skills, learning more about the history and theories behind all sorts of things. So now in our new workforces, and these are the workforces of the future, I think with cultural changes, the workforces will start accepting people for their skills and knowledge. It's going to be a hard road, but for example, the Australian government has a workplace gender equality agency, and they'll do stats every year, and they'll talk about how the Australian government and the private sector can enhance gender equality. And in that agency, they're talking about gender, male, female, or indeterminate, how these people can be supported. And I think that means that the future workforces, if we look that way and keep up this positive way, will actually become a more inclusive, diverse place. I'm already seeing it. I have young stepchildren. They're in their late teens now, but they don't have, Kate was saying earlier about workplaces that are majority men or majority women, and jobs that are you normally think is a woman's job or a men's job. So nursing, for example, and people of my age might go male nurse because it's kind of weird to have a male nurse. Well, it's not, but that's just a cultural thing. The step kids don't say that. They just go nurse, doctor. So I think the generations to come are actually starting to lose the unconscious bias that we all have. And that I believe that things like this with influencers like AusCERT, with the AusCERT conference, they are influencers for having a panel such as this and supporting it, I think is going a long way to actually make our future workforces better for millennials with their tech degrees, millennials with their any degrees, men, women, anybody. And so it's a slow progress, but I think it will happen. So it is a future, and I think the future is bright.
Thank you. So, Kylie, on the topic of millennials, what are some of the things that workplaces are doing to attract this very sought-after group of people?
Great question. So, coming from a workplace perspective, this is the first time we've ever seen 4 generations within the one workplace. So it's actually quite an interesting and a difficult question to answer in a way, because the millennials they have a different work ethic to what the older people would have had. So work ethic doesn't even feature in their top 5 reasons for staying with a company and for pursuing particular work. What I'm seeing in my role as my reinvented chief happiness guru field is that you can invent whatever the hell you want and call yourself whatever you want, which is fantastic. So thank you, millennials. And the second thing is that they're shifting more towards happiness and purpose. They're shifting away from striving for money and power and position. And this shift that's happening is really interesting because we've got there's such a dichotomy between the leaders at the top who are old school, work ethic, loyalty, gold watch. There are still people like that out there, versus millennials who are coming in and saying, well, I don't really care if you give me an extra 10 grand. What I would like is an extra 10 days of annual leave, or I'd like to work from home, or I'd like to choose where and when I work from. And so the millennials are coming in and they really just want choice. They want to choose how and when they work, as well as having a company that has a greater purpose, a purpose that's greater than themselves. So what I love about this next generation is, as Mandy said, the future is quite bright, because I think a lot of these issues that we're talking about here will hopefully not be issues when millennials come into leadership positions. But we still need to fight the fight, because we're still in positions where we are feeling discriminated against and we're not able to achieve our full potential.
Thank you. So I think we're hearing... Oh, go ahead.
But at the same time, we've got to be careful there, because people are coming into the power structures and they tend to be reinforcing what it is that got them to where they are. And so I've seen multiple young people who, at the bottom, they start out that way. But then as soon as they're in a position of power, they do what their boss did to them, which wasn't those norms. It was different norms. And I'm going to go back to that study I said earlier. This is about gender, but it fits across other groups. Although stereotypes encourage discrimination, egalitarian norms compel making hiring decisions on the basis of merit rather than their group membership. Okay. But these conflicting pressures can be reconciled by defining and redefining merit in a manner that justifies discrimination. In our experiment, participants who exhibited the most pro-male bias in their decisions also proved the most confident in the objectivity of their decision. They felt they had chosen the right man for the job, when in fact they had chosen the right job criteria for the man.
Interesting. Okay. So we've got only 5 minutes left. I know that some of you might want to have questions, but we've still got some topics to cover. So I'm going to keep going, and then you can find us in the hallways afterwards. So let's address the elephant in the room. Women leave the workplace to have children, and those that return are often met with extreme challenges in balancing both work and family responsibilities. Unfortunately for most, this coincides with the time that women are entering into managerial positions, and the burden of work responsibilities is at a heightened and far more competitive level. As Sheryl Sandberg, in her amazing book, said, women pass over challenging projects and promotions in the anticipation of having family responsibilities down the line. But we also know that the world is changing, making the workplace more conducive to new mothers and fathers. So, Kylie, what changes are companies making to retain their top talent?
So I'd just like to start off by saying, for all the people who are hiring people, this one statistic I'd like you to remember. Part-time mothers are the most productive of all employees in the workforce. And I'm seeing lots of nodding heads from, I'm assuming, part-time mums. I'm a part-time mum, 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. Part-time worker, full-time mum. Got to get that right. And the balance is really, really tricky. But if you want to get something done, the old adage is give it to a busy person. Well, if you want to get stuff done, give it to a part-time mum, because she's got a certain amount of, or part-time caregiver, because they've got only a certain amount of time in which to get stuff done. So, the other thing is, in terms of trying to retain top talent, flexibility, once again, is absolute key, as well as succession planning. So making sure that people have actually got something to strive for. And the other element that I'd like to focus on is, if you want to retain your top talent, have sponsorship, have mentoring sessions, have leadership training that show people, and it's not just women, it's up and coming everyone, that they have purpose within the company and they are valued, they are respected, and the company is willing to put in time and effort and money into growing that person and helping them be the best person they can be.
Thank you. I think we'll cut the last question, but stick with this topic for the rest of the time. So Mandy, what have you seen working well and what are the challenges?
Well, what I've seen working well, and I work for the government and my whole life is working for the government, so I don't have a lot of private sector experience except for when I was a meso. But what I see working well in the public sector is that there is more active mentoring and supporting and sponsoring. So whether that is a formal mentorship program through the different departments, or whether it is that staff are actively supported to mentor and support each other, I have seen that change in the last years that I've worked for the government. But I have seen that because people are now very more conscious about mentoring and supporting and sponsoring. And that's not just about the women in the industry, but anyone. So someone who may have been considered handicapped because they were sight impaired, for example, there is now mentorship and support to get those people going. So that is what I'm seeing.
Thank you. So Shannon, I know that you fall into the millennial bucket.
Technically.
How does greater flexibility in working hours and spaces and working spaces for that new mothers and fathers also need to make companies more attractive for millennials?
Well, I think in my case, for example, if I'm getting personal, my husband and I haven't decided to have kids yet, but we are considering it as a future choice that we make for our lives. And something that I've seriously considered is how I would continue to grow my career being a podcaster and working with Hack5 and hopefully doing future speaking gigs, but also him continuing to do his job. Luckily, in the case of my life, my husband is more interested in being the caregiver than I am. But unfortunately for him, he doesn't have the flexibility with his job that I have with mine. It would really influence us to keep on going with his career, with his current employment, if they would give him the option to, I don't know, have a daycare at the company. I mean, it would be so simple to
work from home.
Yeah, or
2 days a
include
week.
work from home, which he could technically do because a lot of his job is replying to emails and having meetings over the phones and doing teleconferencing. And there's so much that he could do just hanging out on his computer at home, it would be very, very easy to do. And including some kind of happiness level so that he would be able to further his life that he wants to be a father and still enable me to grow my career, which is what I'm super passionate about. So it's not just about discrimination against women, but it's also discrimination against people who have kids. I mean, I'm sure plenty of men out here that have little kids, you've probably experienced the same thing where you need to take your kid to school, or maybe they're sick one day and you have to deal with those issues. So it's a big problem. It's in this industry for sure, but generally for any kind of employment.
Thank you. So I know that Troy is up next and we're taking some of his time, so I'm just going to flip through these key takeaways. So the first thing is that women experience an uneven playing field. Unconscious biases are real. There's an inherent value in diversity, and the organizations that have been able to understand this are getting the most out of a diverse workforce. Millennials are changing the game, and organizations also need to change to stay competitive in the job market. The things that make workplaces more attractive to millennials also are conducive to working mothers and fathers. And organizations should be purposeful about doing these 4 things. For their female workforce: mentorship and sponsorship, adequate training, challenging assignments, and leadership opportunities. Basically the same things that they are already doing for men. You need to purposefully do it for women.
Can I just jump in there? People who may have been coming in for Troy's talk, welcome. I'm sure you're meant to come in for ours as well, but we would love it if everyone could take a photo of this slide as a key takeaway, and please, let's get it on the agenda, let's get it out there, get people talking about it, because it is absolutely imperative that things change, and it's only through your help and your influence that things can change.
And you can attribute this to Kate Pierce. Thank you, ladies, for this amazing discussion. Thank you so much for coming and listening to us.